The desert wind howled through the ruins, carrying a chill that seemed out of place in the arid Syrian night. Brigadier General Amir Haddad crouched behind a crumbling wall, his flashlight illuminating fragments of an ancient mosaic. The team around him worked in silence, cataloging artifacts under the veil of secrecy. This wasn't just another covert operation. It was something far older, far stranger. "General Haddad," a voice called from the shadows, breaking his concentration. It was Lieutenant Karen, his most trusted operative. She held out a weathered scroll encased in protective glass, her expression unreadable. "We found this in the chamber below. You need to see it." Amir took the scroll, his practiced hands steady despite the weight of his rank. The parchment was brittle, the script faded but decipherable. Aramaic, he realized. Years in intelligence had taught him the language of secrets, and the words leaped from the page like ghosts demanding to be heard. "When the nations gather against the land of Israel, the end shall be revealed. Gog and Magog shall rise, and the earth will tremble in birth pains." A cold shiver coursed through him. Amir wasn't a man of faith. His world revolved around facts, strategy, and the harsh reality of geopolitics. But there was an uncanny resonance in the text, something he couldn't dismiss. "This is nonsense," he muttered, though the words felt hollow. "Some ancient doomsday rambling." Yet as he pocketed the scroll and prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the unease coiling in his chest. The operation was over, but the questions it raised had only just begun. Above, the night sky churned with gathering clouds, as if the heavens themselves held their breath. Something was coming, Amir thought. Something far greater than war. Winds of war. The crackling static of the emergency briefing room filled the air as Major General Miriam Katz leaned over the map table. Satellite images and reconnaissance reports displayed a mosaic of chaos. Missile strikes in the south, skirmishes in the north, and whispers of coordinated assaults from within. Her sharp eyes scanned the data, piecing together a grim picture. "We're facing coordinated escalations on multiple fronts," Katz said, her voice steady but charged with urgency. Her subordinates exchanged wary glances, sensing the magnitude of her words. Gaza, Hezbollah, and now intelligence reports hinting at Iranian-backed militias in Syria. This isn't sporadic. This is calculated. A low murmur rippled through the room. The intelligence reports painted a bleak scenario. Israel wasn't just bracing for an attack. It was on the verge of a seven-front war. The term alone was ominous, evoking memories of biblical struggles. Katz dismissed the thought. She had no time for prophecy. She dealt in strategy and survival. In Tel Aviv, Amir Haddad sat in his dimly lit office, the ancient scroll still in his drawer. He hadn't thought about it since the operation, but now, as reports poured in, his mind drifted back to the cryptic text. Was it coincidence? The rational part of him insisted it was. Yet the patterns forming across the region nagged at him like a faint, unshakable whisper. "Katz is calling," his aide interrupted, holding out a secure phone. "She's got intel you'll want to hear." Amir took the call. "General Katz?" "Amir, it's happening," she said without preamble. "The pieces are moving, and it's bigger than we imagined." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Outside, the hum of sirens began to wail as Israel's Iron Dome activated, intercepting a barrage of rockets streaking toward civilian centers. War was no longer a distant threat. It was at the doorstep. In the chaos, neither Amir nor Katz could shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The winds of war were blowing, and they carried with them a storm no one was prepared to face. The election aftermath. The roar of applause filled the room as screens displayed the bold headline, "Trump re-elected as President of the United States." In the Israeli Knesset, Prime Minister David Elazar turned away from the coverage, his face etched with determination. The re-election of a staunch U.S. ally emboldened his resolve to solidify the Saudi peace deal. "Gentlemen, this is our moment," Elazar declared to his cabinet. "With Trump back in office, we have the leverage to push forward the Abraham Accords expansion." Saudi Arabia is the crown jewel. Skepticism lingered in the room. Some ministers doubted the wisdom of such a high-stakes gamble, especially with tensions mounting across the region. The public won't back this, one minister said, not with Saudi Arabia's history of hostility. Eleazar held up a hand to silence him. History is changing. The region is changing. If we don't act now, we risk losing everything. Meanwhile, Amir Haddad stood in the back, arms crossed. He had come to brief Eleazar on a far more immediate concern. As the cabinet dispersed, Eleazar gestured for Amir to approach. "What is it, Brigadier General?" the Prime Minister asked. Amir placed a classified folder on the desk. "We've intercepted credible intelligence of internal instability in Saudi Arabia. Crown Prince Fahd al-Rashid's grip is tenuous. There's resistance from within his own family." Eleazar frowned. "And yet you're suggesting we proceed with the deal?" "I'm suggesting caution," Amir replied. "The Saudis may want peace, but the ground beneath them is unstable. If they falter, the consequences for Israel could be catastrophic." Eleazar nodded but said nothing. He was a man who thrived on bold moves, yet even he couldn't ignore the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. In politics, as in war, timing was everything, and time, it seemed, was running out. The Abrahamic Rift. In the gilded opulence of his private palace in Riyadh, Crown Prince Fahd al-Rashid stared into his coffee cup as if it held the answers to his mounting worries. The ornate room around him seemed suffocating, despite its vastness. The meeting with Israeli Prime Minister David Eleazar had gone as planned, and yet an invisible weight pressed against his chest. "You're troubled, Highness," his advisor Ahmed ventured cautiously. Fahd nodded, his fingers tracing the delicate porcelain cup. "Do you believe in prophecy, Ahmed? In the idea that the fate of nations can be foretold?" The advisor hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I believe men make their own destinies." Fahd let out a dry laugh. "And yet, here I sit, heir to a throne, bound by the will of others. My ancestors spoke of a time when alliances like this one would spark upheaval. My family has carried this prophecy for generations." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The alignment of Israel and Arabia, they said, would mark the beginning of the end." Ahmed's face remained neutral, but his unease was palpable. "Your Highness, these are tales from a bygone era. What matters now is securing the future for Saudi Arabia. The Abraham Accords offer stability." "And yet my instincts scream otherwise," Fahd murmured, more to himself than his advisor. He thought of the peace deal he was about to finalize, a move that would reshape the Middle East. On paper, it was a triumph. In his heart, it felt like a trap. Far away in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Eleazar received an encrypted message from Fahd, a single line that made him pause. "The sands are shifting beneath our feet." The warning was cryptic but unmistakable. Eleazar closed the message and gazed out over the city, its ancient walls glowing in the twilight. The rift between prophecy and pragmatism was widening, and it threatened to swallow them all. A warning. Ignored. The old synagogue in Jerusalem was packed beyond capacity, its stone walls echoing with the fervent cries of a controversial rabbi. Rabbi Yitzhak Cohen, known for his fiery rhetoric and apocalyptic interpretations, stood at the center of the gathering. His voice carried a sense of urgency that demanded attention. "The birth pains of redemption are upon us," he thundered, gesturing emphatically. "The nations gather against Israel as foretold by Ezekiel. This so-called peace deal is but the prelude to chaos." Amir Haddad watched from the back, arms folded. He wasn't there to listen, he was there to observe. Rabbi Cohen had a growing following, and his words were beginning to seep into the public consciousness. The intelligence community monitored such figures closely, knowing their rhetoric could incite unrest, or worse. After the gathering, Amir met Major General Miriam Katz in a nearby cafe. She'd requested a debrief on the rabbi's influence. "He's feeding the fear," Amir said bluntly, "linking geopolitics to prophecy. His message is gaining traction, especially with the religious right." Kat stirred her coffee absently. "The timing is unsettling," she admitted. "Do you think people believe him?" Amir shrugged. "Belief is a dangerous thing. It doesn't have to be rational to be powerful." Outside, protesters were already gathering, holding signs condemning the Saudi deal and echoing Cohen's warnings. Katz leaned closer. "What about you, Amir? Do you think there's something to this prophecy?" His lips tightened. "I think geopolitics is messy enough without dragging ancient texts into it. But..." He hesitated, the memory of the scroll surfacing unbidden. "Let's just say, I'm paying attention." The conversation ended, but the unease lingered. Amir couldn't shake the feeling that the rabbi's words, dismissed as fringe hysteria, might carry a deeper resonance, one the world was not ready to face. The shadow players. Beneath the veneer of Washington, D.C.'s bustling politics, far from the public eye, a secretive group convened in an underground conference room. The Prometheus Council, an elite cabal of financiers, former intelligence officials, and corporate magnates, gathered around a polished oak table. Each member represented a force behind the scenes, shaping the world's trajectory in ways most could only imagine. At the head of the table sat Marcus Vale, the enigmatic leader of the council. His silver hair and sharp suit belied the ruthless mind that had orchestrated coups and crises across the globe. A holographic projection of the Middle East floated above the table, glowing with strategic markers. "The Ezekiel prophecy," Vale began, his voice cold and measured. "It's no longer just a religious myth. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be wielded to shape outcomes." A murmur rippled through the room as he gestured to the hologram. "The Middle East is a pressure cooker. By aligning the right players, Russia, Turkey, Iran, we create the conditions for chaos. The prophecy narrative gives us leverage over religious zealots, politicians, and military leaders alike. And chaos, gentlemen, is opportunity." An analyst seated near the end of the table spoke up hesitantly. "What about Israel? Their intelligence capabilities are formidable. If they catch wind of this..." Vale silenced him with a sharp glare. "Israel is a pawn, just like everyone else. Brigadier General Haddad might be clever, but even he won't see the full picture until it's too late." The council members nodded, their faces impassive. Their goal was clear: orchestrate a conflict so profound that it would reshape global power structures, leaving them as the ultimate beneficiaries. As the meeting adjourned, Vale lingered behind, his gaze fixed on the map of Israel. "Gog and Magog," he whispered, almost mockingly. "Let the faithful see what they want to see. In the end, we control the pieces." Above ground, the world carried on, oblivious to the machinations of the shadow players who were setting the stage for chaos. "Echoes in Gaza!" The dim light of the kerosene lamp flickered as Layla Hassim pored over a stack of yellowed documents. Her family's modest home in Gaza City was alive with hushed voices, her younger siblings playing quietly in the next room. But Layla's mind was elsewhere, consumed by the discovery she had stumbled upon. The documents had been hidden in an old chest belonging to her late grandfather, a Palestinian historian who had always spoken of the region's complex history with reverence. At first, the papers seemed like a collection of mundane genealogical records. But the further she delved, the more shocking the revelations became. Her family, it appeared, had an ancient connection to a Jewish lineage, a connection that could upend everything she had been taught. "Layla?" Her brother Kareem appeared in the doorway, his face shadowed by concern. "What are you doing?" She quickly folded the papers and slid them under the lamp. "Nothing, Kareem. Just some old records." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Layla knew Kareem had changed in recent months, his involvement with Hamas pulling him deeper into extremism. She also knew that if he discovered what she had found, It would be seen as a betrayal, not just to him, but to their entire cause. Later that night, as the city trembled under the sound of distant rocket fire, Layla stared out the window. She had always believed in her people's struggle, but now doubt crept in. The history in her hands didn't just challenge her identity, it challenged the narratives that defined the conflict itself. Somewhere deep inside, Layla felt the stirrings of a dangerous question. What if the truth was more complicated than sides? First contraction. The night sky over Tel Aviv erupted in fire and chaos as an unprecedented missile strike struck the heart of the city. The Iron Dome intercepted many, but not all. One missile slipped through, slamming into a bustling residential area and leaving devastation in its wake. In the IDF command center, Major General Miriam Katz barked orders as the room buzzed with activity. "I want a full report on the source of those missiles, and prepare a response team for immediate deployment." Katz's demeanor was steely, but inside she was shaken. The strike had killed civilians, including children. This wasn't a typical skirmish. It was an escalation unlike anything they had seen in years. Brigadier General Amir Haddad entered the room, his face grim. "We've identified the source," he said, handing Katz a file. "The missiles were supplied by an unknown foreign actor. These aren't standard Gaza stock." Katz flipped through the file, her jaw tightening. "Iran?" Amir hesitated. "Possibly, but the tech doesn't match their usual supply lines. It's advanced, too advanced. We might be looking at a new player." As Katz absorbed the implications, her phone buzzed with a secure message from the Prime Minister's office. Israel's retaliation was already being drafted. The political pressure to act swiftly was mounting. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Layla Hassim watched the strike's aftermath on a smuggled smartphone. The images were horrific, yet they stirred something in her, a growing realization that the cycle of violence served no one. Her brother Karim, however, saw the same images and vowed revenge, his hatred deepening with every frame. As the first retaliatory strikes lit up the Gaza sky, Layla whispered a prayer for survival. Unbeknownst to her, this was just the beginning of a far greater storm, a contraction that would ripple across the region and beyond. The prophecy's edge. The Mossad facility was hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and security, its location known only to a select few. Brigadier General Amir Haddad stepped into the dimly lit archives, his expression guarded. He wasn't one for superstitions, but the scroll from the Syrian operation had refused to leave his mind. Something about the words haunted him, their weight pressing on his logic. Across the room, a tall, wiry man with sharp features and a scholarly air waited. Dr. Eliav Neiman, Mossad's leading expert on ancient texts and esoteric history, greeted Amir with a nod. "You brought something interesting, General," Neiman said, holding up the protective case containing the scroll. "Where did you find it?" "A ruin in Syria," Amir replied, keeping his tone neutral. "It's just another artifact, or so I thought." Neiman carefully unsealed the case and unrolled the scroll with delicate hands. His eyes darted across the faded Aramaic script, his brow furrowing with every line. "This is astonishing," he murmured. "It references Gog and Magog directly. The alignment of nations against Israel, earthquakes, fires in the heavens. It's eerily consistent with Ezekiel's prophecy." Amir crossed his arms, leaning against the desk. "You're saying this is more than a coincidence?" Neiman hesitated, then looked up. "I'm saying whoever wrote this was either a masterful manipulator of future events or there's something beyond our understanding at work. The text even mentions alliances we see forming now. Russia, Turkey, Iran. It's as if it's describing today." Amir felt a chill run down his spine but shook it off. "Prophecies are vague by design, Eliav. They're meant to fit any situation." "Perhaps," Neiman admitted, "but this one feels different." Outside, thunder rolled over Jerusalem, though the skies remained clear. Amir left the archives with a sense of unease he couldn't explain. He didn't believe in prophecy, but the patterns emerging in the world were harder to ignore. The edge between rationality and faith was razor thin, and Amir wasn't sure which side he stood on anymore. Breaking point. The streets of Jerusalem were a battleground of opposing voices. Protesters flooded the squares, waving banners denouncing Israel's retaliatory strikes on Gaza. Global media amplified the outrage, with headlines decrying the violence on both sides. The world was watching, and Israel was in the crosshairs. Inside the Prime Minister's office, David Elazar faced his cabinet. The mood was tense, the air thick with unspoken fears. "The world is turning against us," Defense Minister Shira Avni said bluntly. "Even the Harris administration is hesitating to back us publicly." Elazar's jaw tightened. "We don't need their permission to defend ourselves." Brigadier General Amir Haddad stood at the edge of the room, his presence more symbolic than required. He observed the political infighting, the fractures forming within the leadership. It mirrored the chaos outside, division everywhere, fueled by propaganda and fear. Meanwhile, Major General Miriam Katz was in the field, overseeing operations in the north. Hezbollah's attacks from Lebanon were intensifying, and reports indicated that Iranian-backed militias were amassing along the Golan Heights. The specter of a seven-front war loomed closer with every passing hour. Amir's phone buzzed, a secure message from Mossad. The sender was Eliav Neiman. "We need to talk. Urgent findings regarding the scroll." Amir ignored it for now. He had no time for ancient texts while the present threatened to collapse. Yet a nagging thought lingered. Was the chaos unfolding around them merely coincidence, or were they inching towards something inevitable? As the cabinet meeting broke up, Elazar pulled Amir aside. "What do you think, Brigadier? Are we ready for what's coming?" Amir met his gaze, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. "We don't have a choice. Ready or not, it's here." The Prime Minister nodded, his expression hardening. Outside, the first flashes of protest fires lit up the night. The breaking point had arrived, and there was no turning back. A shattered accord. The attack came just after midnight, a calculated strike on a convoy carrying Saudi Crown Prince Fahad al-Rashid through Riyadh. The explosion sent shockwaves through the city, killing several of his guards and injuring the prince himself. Within hours, the media was flooded with speculation about the perpetrators, and the fragile Saudi-Israeli peace deal teetered on the edge of collapse. In Tel Aviv, Brigadier General Amir Haddad was summoned to an emergency briefing with Mossad. The room was alive with tension as analysts dissected the evidence. "We've intercepted coded communications," a young operative explained, projecting an image of scrambled text on the screen. "The messages suggest involvement from an external faction, not Iran, not Hamas. Something different." Amir leaned forward. "Different how?" The analyst hesitated before replying. "The messages match patterns we've seen linked to Prometheus." Amir's stomach sank. The shadowy organization had long been suspected of manipulating global events, but this confirmation was something else entirely. "And their objective?" he asked. The director of Mossad, a grizzled veteran named Zvi Levin, answered gravely. "To sabotage the peace accords, to trigger chaos on an unprecedented scale." Across the border, Major General Katz faced a different kind of chaos. Hezbollah's forces had launched a fresh wave of attacks, forcing Katz to make a difficult choice: divert resources from Gaza to bolster the northern defenses. "If we're spread too thin, we'll collapse under the pressure," Katz warned her staff. "But if we don't act now, the north could be overrun." As Katz prepared for a potential northern offensive, Amir contacted Prime Minister Elazar with his findings. The pieces of Prometheus's plan were falling into place, but time was running out to stop them. In Riyadh, Crown Prince Fahad emerged from his hospital bed with a vow that echoed across the region. "This attack will not deter us. Peace must prevail." But in the shadows, Prometheus celebrated another victory. The game was far from over, and chaos was their greatest ally. The Seven Fronts. The sound of mortar shells echoed across the northern border as Major General Miriam Katz stood on a fortified hilltop, scanning the horizon with binoculars. The Golan Heights had become a flashpoint, with Iranian-backed militias massing just beyond the Syrian border. To the west, Hezbollah's forces pushed deeper into Israeli territory with rocket fire and guerrilla incursions. It wasn't just one front, it was seven. 7 simultaneous theaters, Katz muttered to her deputy, Colonel Ezra Menachem. They're forcing us to spread thin. Menachem nodded grimly. Gaza in the south, Hezbollah in the north, West Bank uprisings, cyber attacks targeting infrastructure, and now reports of sleeper cells in Haifa and Tel Aviv. It's the perfect storm. Katz tightened her grip on the binoculars. Perfect for them, catastrophic for us. At the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, Brigadier General Amir Haddad was briefing the Prime Minister and senior defense officials. Satellite images and intercepted communications painted a dire picture, coordinated assaults from multiple directions, all pointing to a singular goal: Israel's destabilization. The timing is no accident, Amir explained, gesturing to a map lit with red markers. They're testing us, probing for weakness. The coordination suggests foreign influence, likely Iran, but Prometheus may be pulling strings behind the scenes. Prime Minister Elazar rubbed his temples. What's your assessment? Are we looking at all-out war? We already are, Amir replied bluntly. The question is how we hold the line. Back in Gaza, Layla Hassim witnessed the first stirrings of Hamas's latest offensive. Her brother Karim was among those rallying for the next attack. Layla's protests fell on deaf ears. This isn't about freedom anymore, Karim, she pleaded. It's about destruction. Don't you see that? But Karim's eyes burned with zealotry. You don't understand, Layla. Israel must fall, and we will be the ones to make it happen. As the night deepened, rockets lit up the skies over Israel, and the Iron Dome strained to intercept them. Across every front, soldiers braced for impact, their resolve tempered by the growing realization that this was no ordinary conflict. In the chaos, Amir's thoughts returned to the scroll and its cryptic warnings of alliances and contractions. He didn't believe in prophecy, but the world seemed determined to prove him wrong. Faith under fire. Colonel Noam Lev knelt beside the smoldering wreckage of a troop carrier, his face streaked with soot and despair. The attack near the Lebanese border had been brutal, claiming the lives of half his unit. Among the dead was Sergeant Yuri Dror, Lev's closest friend and confidant. We were ambushed, Lev reported through gritted teeth over a secure line to Katz. Hezbollah knew our route, knew our weak points. Someone fed them intel. Katz's voice was steady but strained. Get your remaining men out of there, Noam. We can't lose you too. As Lev coordinated the retreat, his mind swirled with guilt and doubt. For years, he had believed in the righteousness of Israel's fight, but the endless cycle of bloodshed was wearing on him. Yuri's death was another wound in a heart already scarred by loss. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Layla Hassim found herself in a moral quandary. She had stumbled upon a trove of documents detailing Hamas's acquisition of advanced weapons, proof of foreign interference, likely from Iran or Russia. But exposing these secrets could endanger her family and label her a traitor. She confided in an old friend, Tariq, who worked with an underground peace network. Layla, if you have information that could stop the violence, you must act, Tariq urged her. But what about my brother? My family? She whispered, her voice trembling. They'll suffer either way, Tariq said softly. The question is whether you let fear silence you. On the northern front, Colonel Lev rallied his men for one final push to secure their position. Despite his personal anguish, his resolve burned brighter than ever. Faith, he realized, wasn't about certainty. It was about standing firm when everything else crumbled. As the night wore on, two souls, Layla in Gaza and Lev on the battlefield, found themselves tested in ways they could never have imagined. Their decisions would ripple far beyond them, shaping the fate of nations. The Prometheus blueprint. Brigadier General Amir Haddad adjusted the hidden microphone in his lapel, his heartbeat steady despite the high stakes. Disguised as a wealthy arms dealer, he was about to infiltrate a meeting of the Prometheus Council in a remote villa outside Geneva. The operation was months in the making, and now, with the world on the brink, time was running out to unmask the shadowy organization. Inside the villa, the council members lounged around a marble table, their faces obscured by dim lighting. Amir recognized Marcus Vale immediately, his commanding presence dominating the room. A holographic map of the Middle East hovered in the air, dotted with glowing red zones of conflict. "We're nearing the tipping point," Vale announced, his voice calm but charged with authority. "With the alliances forming against Israel, it's only a matter of time before the chaos reaches critical mass." Amir's pulse quickened as he listened. He activated the recording device, capturing every word. "What's the endgame?" another member asked. Vale smirked. "Control. The fall of Israel will trigger a cascade of events, economic collapse, regional wars, and a power vacuum we can fill. The prophecy narratives are our greatest weapon. The faithful will see what we want them to see." Amir fought to keep his expression neutral. The council wasn't just exploiting geopolitical tensions, they were weaponizing ancient beliefs to manipulate millions. As the meeting adjourned, Amir slipped out, his mind racing. He had the intel, but exposing Prometheus would be a Herculean task. Their web of influence extended across nations and institutions. Worse, he couldn't shake the feeling that even this revelation was part of their design. Back in Tel Aviv, Amir shared his findings with Mossad. "They're playing God," he said grimly, "and they're betting on us to play along." The pieces of Prometheus's blueprint were falling into place, but for Amir, the question remained. Could he stop the game before it consumed them all? The contraction tightens. The ground beneath Jerusalem trembled as an earthquake rippled through the city, toppling ancient stone walls and shattering modern glass towers. The tremor was unlike anything the region had felt in decades, brief but violent, as though the earth itself groaned under an unseen weight. Sirens wailed in the aftermath, their shrill cries mingling with the chaos of terrified civilians pouring into the streets. In his office, Brigadier General Amir Haddad steadied himself against a bookshelf as the shaking subsided. Papers and books lay scattered across the floor, but Amir's focus was elsewhere. The earthquake wasn't just a natural disaster, it was the latest in a series of unsettling events that seemed to follow the pattern described in the scroll. Eliav Neiman's voice crackled through the secure line. "Amir, are you seeing this? It's exactly as the text predicted, an earthquake centered near Jerusalem." Amir pinched the bridge of his nose. "Coincidence," he replied, though his tone betrayed his unease. "Earthquakes happen." "Not like this," Neiman insisted. "The timing, the location, it's all too precise." Outside the city, Major General Miriam Katz was coordinating emergency relief efforts while monitoring the northern front. The tremor had disrupted key supply lines and weakened defensive positions. "We're stretched thin as it is," she told her staff. "If the enemy moves now, we'll be vulnerable." Meanwhile in Gaza, Layla Hassim watched the destruction on a smuggled news feed. The earthquake had spared her city, but the images from Jerusalem struck a chord deep within her. Her brother Karim dismissed it as divine punishment, a sign that their cause was just. Layla wasn't so sure. The quake felt less like judgment and more like a warning, one that no one was heeding. As the dust settled, religious leaders from around the world declared the quake a sign of prophetic fulfillment. The faithful flocked to social media, spreading verses from Ezekiel and Revelation. The birth pains, they claimed, were intensifying. For Amir, the earthquake was another tightening of the noose, a contraction that hinted at an inevitable climax. But whether that climax was orchestrated by divine will or human hands, he couldn't yet say. A crossroads of belief. Layla Hassim sat in the dimly lit safe house, her hands trembling as she clutched the encrypted phone. She had finally reached out to Mossad, risking everything to share her family's lineage secret and the documents proving Hamas's foreign connections. She knew it was treason in the eyes of her people, but the truth weighed too heavily on her conscience to remain silent. Amir Haddad listened intently as Layla explained her discovery. Her voice was filled with a mix of fear and conviction. My grandfather's research shows a direct connection between my family and an ancient Jewish tribe. If Hamas finds out, I'm as good as dead. Amir's expression hardened as he absorbed her words. The revelation wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a potential game changer. Layla, you've put yourself in grave danger by coming to us. Are you sure about this? I don't have a choice, she replied. Hamas is using people like my brother, feeding them lies. And now, with these weapons shipments, it's not about resistance anymore. It's about annihilation. Amir nodded, his respect for Layla growing. We'll protect you, but you need to stay under the radar. If they find out you've contacted us... They already suspect, Layla said softly. That's why I'm here. Meanwhile, Karim Hassim prowled the streets of Gaza, his suspicions about Layla growing. He had overheard her hushed conversations and noticed her growing distance from the cause. To him, she was becoming a traitor, and in their world there was no redemption for that. Back in Tel Aviv, Amir shared the intel with his team, who began connecting the dots between Layla's documents and Prometheus's operations. She's given us a lead, Amir said, but it's fragile. One wrong move, and it all collapses. Layla's choice to reach out had set off a chain reaction, one that placed her at the center of a storm. At the crossroads of belief and survival, she had chosen the truth, knowing it might cost her everything. A Saudi gambit. The grand hall of the Saudi royal palace was filled with dignitaries, journalists, and military leaders. Prince Fahd al-Rashid stood at the podium, his face pale but resolute. The assassination attempt had left him with visible scars, but his spirit was unbroken. Cameras flashed as he spoke, his words carried live across the region. The forces of division will not prevail, Fahd declared, his voice steady. Today, I reaffirm my commitment to the Abraham Accords. Peace is the only path forward. The announcement was met with cautious applause from the audience and outright fury from hardliners within Saudi Arabia. Fahd's decision was a bold gamble, one that risked not only his political future, but also his life. For him, the choice was clear: unity or destruction. In Israel, Prime Minister David Elazar watched the broadcast with a mix of relief and anxiety. Fahd's commitment was a crucial win, but the situation remained fragile. It's a brave move, Elazar said to his advisors, but it paints a target on his back. Amir Haddad was less optimistic. Prometheus won't let this stand. They've invested too much in destabilizing the region. Meanwhile, in Riyadh, Fahd's inner circle scrambled to secure his position. Advisors warned him of rising dissent among conservative factions, while intelligence reports suggested that foreign actors were funneling weapons to opposition groups. You've made enemies, Highness, Ahmed, his most trusted advisor, said gravely. I've made the right choice, Fahd replied. That's all that matters. On Israel's northern front, Major General Katz was preparing for the worst. Peace is a fragile illusion, she told her staff. The real battle is coming, and we need to be ready. As the world held its breath, the fragile threads of diplomacy and conflict were stretched to their breaking point. Fahd's gambit had raised the stakes, but whether it would lead to peace or war remained uncertain. The betrayal. The moon cast a cold, pale light over Tel Aviv as Brigadier General Amir Haddad stepped into the Mossad Operations Center. The tension in the room was palpable, with agents hunched over screens displaying streams of intercepted communications. A recent leak had exposed key Israeli defense strategies, leaving high-ranking officials scrambling to assess the damage. This wasn't a simple breach, said Eliav Neiman, his voice low and grave. The intel leaked was top tier, access level red. Only a handful of people could have provided it. Amir's jaw tightened. A mole. Eliav nodded. And not just any mole. The leak went directly to Iranian proxies. This was deliberate, calculated. Hours later, the internal investigation confirmed their worst fears. The culprit was identified. A high-ranking official within the Ministry of Defense, someone Amir had worked with on countless occasions. Colonel Gideon Weiss, a decorated officer, had been secretly passing information to Prometheus for years. When Weiss was apprehended, his face betrayed no emotion. In the dim interrogation room, Amir confronted him personally. "Why?" he demanded, his voice like steel. "Why betray everything you swore to protect?" Weiss leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. "You don't understand, Amir. None of you do. This isn't about Israel. It's about survival, on a global scale. Prometheus has seen the future, and they're the only ones who can control it." Amir slammed his fist on the table. "You sold us out for their lies!" Weiss smiled faintly. "It's not lies, Amir. It's inevitability." The fallout from Weiss's betrayal was immediate. Sensitive operations were compromised, forcing the IDF to pivot their strategies. Major General Miriam Katz, already battling on multiple fronts, had to make impossible choices, reallocating resources and recalibrating defenses in the face of mounting threats. Amir left the interrogation room with a storm of emotions brewing inside him. Weiss's actions weren't just a betrayal of trust. They were a crack in Israel's foundation, a weakness their enemies would exploit. Outside, the city lights of Tel Aviv twinkled like stars, oblivious to the storm gathering beyond the horizon. Amir knew the betrayal was just the beginning. Prometheus's web was vast, and the fight to unravel it had only just begun. Gog and Magog assemble. The Kremlin's grand chamber was dimly lit, its high ceilings and opulent decor contrasting with the dark purpose of the meeting taking place within. Russian President Viktor Mikhailov stood at the head of the table, flanked by high-ranking officials from Turkey and Iran. The alliance that had been whispered about for years was finally solidifying. "Our objectives align," Mikhailov said, his voice smooth and commanding. "Israel's dominance destabilizes the balance of power in the region. Together, we can shift that balance." Iran's Supreme Commander, General Qasem Shirazi, nodded. "Israel's defenses are formidable, but their recent vulnerabilities are telling. With coordinated pressure, they will fall." Turkey's Foreign Minister, Selim Kaya, added, "The economic benefits of this alliance cannot be overstated. A destabilized Israel means greater control over energy routes and regional trade." The three leaders formalized their plans: joint military drills near Israeli territory, enhanced cyber warfare capabilities, and strategic alliances with proxy forces in the region. For them, the war against Israel wasn't just ideological, it was pragmatic, a pathway to global influence. In Tel Aviv, Amir Haddad presented the alarming intelligence to the Israeli cabinet. Satellite images confirmed Russian, Turkish, and Iranian forces conducting joint drills near the Golan Heights. The implications were chilling. "This isn't saber-rattling," Amir said, his voice heavy. "This is preparation for something far more coordinated. The Gog and Magog alliance is no longer a theory, it's a reality." Prime Minister David Elazar's expression darkened. "And the world? How are they reacting?" Amir glanced at his notes. "Condemnation from some quarters, silence from others. The Harris administration is urging diplomacy, but it's clear they're hesitant to commit." As the meeting concluded, the sense of impending doom was palpable. Israel stood alone, a nation surrounded by enemies preparing for war. Outside, the heavens seemed to churn, as if nature itself sensed the gravity of the moment. For Amir, the lines between prophecy and geopolitics blurred further. The scroll's warnings were no longer abstract. They were unfolding before his eyes. The birth of chaos, The summit in Geneva was meant to be a beacon of diplomacy, a last-ditch effort to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East. Instead, it became the epicenter of coordinated chaos. Within hours of the summit's opening, simultaneous terrorist attacks struck 3 cities: Jerusalem, Riyadh, and Washington, D.C. Bombs detonated in crowded marketplaces and government buildings, leaving carnage and confusion in their wake. In Jerusalem, the Knesset shook as an explosion ripped through a nearby district, killing dozens and wounding hundreds. Amir Haddad received the news in real time. His phone buzzed relentlessly with updates from Mossad and IDF command. "It's Prometheus," Eliav Neiman said over the line. "This isn't coincidence. They've orchestrated this to fracture any hope of unity." In Washington, the Harris administration declared a state of emergency, but their hesitance to engage further in the Middle East grew more apparent. Saudi Crown Prince Fahd al-Rashid barely escaped the attack in Riyadh, his survival only deepening his resolve to push forward with the Abraham Accords. Israel's response was swift but measured. Major General Miriam Katz ordered targeted strikes on Gaza and Hezbollah strongholds, balancing retaliation with the need to avoid further escalation. "We can't let them think we're weak," Katz told her officers, "but we also can't give them the war they're baiting us into." Layla Hassim watched the carnage unfold on the news, her heart heavy with despair. She had risked everything to share vital intelligence with Mossad, but the attacks made her feel as if her efforts had been in vain. In her safe house, she prayed silently for the strength to continue her dangerous journey. The summit ended in chaos, its purpose thwarted. The world was no closer to peace. If anything, it was closer to the brink. For Prometheus, it was a victory. For Amir, it was confirmation that the battle ahead would not only test Israel, but his own faith in the very fabric of human resilience. The Saudi-Israeli pact, the golden halls of King Fahd International Conference Center in Riyadh, glimmered under the lights of a historic moment. Against all odds and amidst the chaos of recent attacks, Saudi Crown Prince Fahd al-Rashid and Israeli Prime Minister David Elazar stood side by side. The signing of the Saudi-Israeli peace accord, the culmination of years of secret negotiations, was about to take place. The world watched with bated breath. For Israel, the pact symbolized hope, a fragile thread of unity in a region long divided by conflict. For Saudi Arabia, it was a gamble for progress and stability in the face of internal resistance and external threats. As Fahd stepped forward to sign the treaty, murmurs of unease rippled through the crowd. Both nations knew that this agreement painted a target on their backs. Yet Fahd's expression remained resolute, his pen steady as he inscribed his name. When Elazar followed suit, applause erupted. Tentative at first, then building into a crescendo of cautious optimism. Watching the ceremony on a secure feed in Tel Aviv, Brigadier General Amir Haddad couldn't shake his unease. The attacks orchestrated by Prometheus had been timed to derail this very moment. Their failure to stop the signing didn't mean they had abandoned their plans. It meant they were shifting tactics. "This isn't over," Amir muttered to Eliav Neiman. "The pact is a victory, but it's also a trigger." In the shadow of Riyadh's grandeur, Layla Hassim arrived at a clandestine Mossad safe house. Her documents and testimony were being used to piece together the connections between Prometheus and the recent attacks. Despite her fear, she felt a glimmer of hope watching the accord unfold. For Prince Fahd, the stakes were deeply personal. Later that evening, as he addressed his nation, his words carried the weight of a man walking a knife's edge. "This accord is not surrender," he declared. "It is a declaration that peace is our greatest weapon against those who seek chaos." But in the dark corners of Riyadh, dissent brewed. Conservative factions saw the pact as betrayal, while whispers of rebellion grew louder. In Tel Aviv, Amir briefed the IDF. "Prometheus thrives on instability. With this pact, they'll push harder than ever." The ink had barely dried before the first cracks began to appear. The Saudi-Israeli pact was signed, but its survival would depend on the resolve of those who dared to believe in its promise. The final warning. In a secluded Mossad library, The scholar Eliav Neiman worked feverishly over a cluster of ancient texts. The parchment Amir Haddad had recovered from Syria lay spread out before him, its cryptic lines now fully translated. A single phrase leapt from the text, chilling in its simplicity. "The final contraction will shake the earth. Those who rise shall fall." Eliav leaned back in his chair, staring at the words. Every prediction the scroll had made thus far had come to pass. Alignments of nations, natural disasters, and escalating conflicts. He had dismissed it as coincidence, but now the patterns were undeniable. The scroll wasn't just a relic, it was a map. He called Amir immediately. "General, you need to hear this," Eliav said, urgency in his voice. "The next event in the prophecy is imminent, and it's catastrophic." "What kind of event?" Amir asked, his tone sharp. "The scroll describes it as a final contraction," Eliav explained. "If the text is accurate, it will be a global catastrophe, not just regional. Earthquakes, perhaps, or something even more devastating. But the most chilling part is this. It predicts that the alliances forming now will collapse in its wake." Amir's grip on the phone tightened. "And what happens if it's true?" Eliav hesitated. "The scroll implies that after the fall of the alliances, a new power will rise. It doesn't say who or what, but it's clear this is the culmination." As Amir hung up, his thoughts raced. The warning was too vague to act on, yet too precise to ignore. Prometheus had already manipulated much of the chaos. Was this final contraction part of their plan, or something beyond even their control? Meanwhile, in Riyadh, Prince Fahd received his own warning. A coded message from an unknown source. Its meaning was clear. "The pact will not hold." The air felt heavy, as though the entire world held its breath. Amir, Fahd, and Elazar stood on the precipice, each grappling with the knowledge that the next move would change everything. The Gog Alliance strikes. In the early hours before dawn, a coordinated cyber attack brought Israel's defense systems to their knees. Power grids flickered and failed, emergency sirens blared, and communication networks were plunged into chaos. The infamous Gog Alliance, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, had struck with a precision that defied even Israel's formidable cyber defenses. Major General Miriam Katz received the news as she prepared for a routine briefing. "Iron Dome is down in several key sectors," her aide reported. "Our satellites show significant troop movements near the Golan Heights." "Activate contingency plans," Katz ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We're not letting them breach." The IDF scrambled to restore systems, but the cyber attack had left them vulnerable. In the north, Iranian-backed militias launched an all-out assault, while Turkish naval forces staged provocative maneuvers near the Mediterranean. From the south, Hamas renewed its missile campaign, exploiting the temporary collapse of Israel's defenses. In the chaos, Amir Haddad coordinated with Mossad to trace the source of the cyber attack. "It's Prometheus," Eliav Neiman confirmed. "Their fingerprints are all over this." "But why now?" Amir asked. "What's their endgame?" "They're accelerating the collapse," Eliav replied. "If the scroll is right, this attack is the first step in dismantling the alliances they've created." In Tel Aviv, the cabinet met in a secure underground bunker. Prime Minister Elazar's voice rang out above the din. "We must hold the line at all costs. If they breach the Golan, it's over." As the Gog Alliance pressed their offensive, Amir found himself questioning everything. Was this just another power play, or were they hurtling toward the prophecy's final contraction? In the skies over Israel, fighter jets roared to life, their engines a desperate cry against the tide of chaos. Faith in the firestorm. Colonel Noam Lev's unit moved through the shattered remnants of a northern village, their boots crunching over broken glass and charred debris. The relentless assaults from Hezbollah and Iranian-backed forces had left devastation in their wake. Yet as the enemy advanced, Lev's resolve only hardened. "We hold here," Lev commanded, his voice cutting through the crackle of distant gunfire. "No matter what comes, we don't give them an inch." His soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen Lev's bravery before, but something about his tone carried an edge of finality. Among them, rumors swirled that this might be their last stand. Yet Lev's faith in their mission remained unshaken, even as the odds stacked against them. In Tel Aviv, Brigadier General Amir Haddad watched the situation unfold with growing dread. Reports from every front painted a dire picture. Northern villages under siege, southern cities bombarded, and cyber attacks paralyzing critical infrastructure. But amidst the chaos, one glimmer of hope emerged. Layla Hassim, operating from her Mossad safe house, delivered a critical piece of intelligence. Using her knowledge of Hamas's internal networks, she pinpointed a hidden weapons depot containing advanced systems supplied by Prometheus. It was a risky lead, but Amir knew they couldn't afford to wait.
"Send this to Lev's unit,"
Amir ordered.
"If they can hit that depot, it could turn the tide."
In the field, Lev received the orders and didn't hesitate. Leading a small strike team, he infiltrated the depot under the cover of darkness. The operation was brutal, with heavy losses on both sides, but Lev's team succeeded in destroying the stockpile. As the depot erupted in flames, Lev stood at the edge of the inferno, a fatal wound in his side. His final act was to radio in their success before succumbing to his injuries. His sacrifice reignited the morale of Israel's forces, proving that even in the firestorm, faith could endure. Jerusalem under siege. Jerusalem's ancient streets, once bustling with life, now echoed with the distant rumble of artillery. The city had become a fortress, its walls reinforced and its people bracing for the worst. The Gog Alliance's forces were advancing, and for the first time in decades, Israel's capital faced the real threat of siege. Prime Minister David Elazar addressed the nation from an underground bunker. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. "We will not falter. Jerusalem has stood for millennia, and it will stand for millennia more." At the northern front, Major General Miriam Katz coordinated a desperate defense. "They're throwing everything at us," she reported to Amir. "We're holding for now, but if their main force reaches Jerusalem, we won't be able to stop them." Amir, now juggling the weight of intelligence, diplomacy, and prophecy, struggled to focus. The ancient scroll's prediction of a great siege felt disturbingly accurate. Yet amidst the darkness, a miraculous event unfolded. As enemy forces closed in on Jerusalem, a sudden blinding light illuminated the city. Witnesses described it as otherworldly, a dome of light that halted advancing forces in their tracks. Communications from the Gog Alliance reported widespread panic among their troops, with many abandoning their positions. Religious leaders declared the event a divine intervention, a fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Scientists scrambled for explanations, theorizing about electromagnetic pulses or unknown technology. For Amir, the truth was elusive. The light had turned the tide, but its source remained a mystery. In the stillness that followed, the people of Jerusalem dared to hope. The siege had been halted, but the battle was far from over. Prophetic fulfillment? In the aftermath of the light over Jerusalem, the world was captivated. Social media erupted with debates, news outlets speculated wildly, and religious leaders across faiths proclaimed it a sign from God. Yet in the war rooms of Israel, questions lingered. Amir Haddad pored over intelligence reports. "There's no indication of a technological source," Eliav Neiman confirmed. "But whatever it was, it worked." "It's not over," Amir replied. "The alliances are regrouping. They're just as confused as we are. But confusion doesn't stop wars." Meanwhile, Layla Hassim's bravery in assisting Mossad finally caught up to her. Hamas operatives discovered her safe house, forcing her to flee with Mossad agents. In the chaos, she witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by Prometheus's manipulations. "I've seen enough lies," she told Amir during a secure video call. "It's time to end this." Her words resonated with Amir. With Layla's help, Mossad uncovered critical evidence linking Prometheus to the Gog Alliance's coordination. Yet the light over Jerusalem had disrupted Prometheus's plans as much as it had the enemy's forces. As Amir studied the scroll once more, he realized its final words held new significance. Those who seek to control shall crumble beneath the weight of their own schemes. Prometheus, it seemed, had underestimated the power of belief and of chaos. Collapse of Prometheus. The Prometheus Council convened in a hidden bunker deep beneath Geneva, their normally composed faces marred by panic. The light over Jerusalem had disrupted everything, unraveling years of careful planning. Marcus Vale, the enigmatic leader of the council, paced at the head of the room, his frustration palpable. Our proxies are in disarray, Vale growled, slamming his fist on the table. The Gog alliance is splintering. Iran is threatening to withdraw. Turkey is accusing Russia of betrayal, and the ground operations in Gaza and Lebanon are collapsing. One of the council members, a data analyst named Darcy, hesitated before speaking. It's not just the military front. That whistleblower, Hassim, she's exposing us. The documents she provided are spreading like wildfire. Governments are opening investigations. Sanctions are being discussed. Vale's piercing gaze silenced her. We've faced setbacks before. We will regroup. But another voice, that of a senior financier, cut through the tension. No, Marcus. This is different. They've seen us. The mystique is gone. Prometheus cannot operate in the shadows if every government is hunting us. Outside the bunker, protests erupted across major cities, fueled by Layla Hassim's revelations. She had risked her life to expose Prometheus's operations, and the public backlash was swift. Nations once complicit with the Council's machinations turned on them to save face. Prometheus operatives were arrested, their assets frozen, and their web of influence severed. In Tel Aviv, Amir Haddad watched the fallout with grim satisfaction. They built their empire on secrecy and manipulation, he said to Eliav Neiman. Without it, they're nothing. For Layla, the victory was bittersweet. Though she had struck a decisive blow against Prometheus, she remained haunted by the destruction they had caused. Her bravery had reshaped the world, but at a cost she could never forget. The reckoning of nations. The fractures within the Gog alliance deepened as their unity crumbled. In Moscow, Russian President Viktor Mikhailov fumed as Turkey accused his forces of sabotaging joint operations. General Qasem Shirazi of Iran pulled his troops from Syria, denouncing both Russia and Turkey as unreliable partners. The power vacuum left behind by Prometheus's collapse created chaos in the Middle East. Proxy forces loyal to the alliance turned on one another, vying for control of dwindling resources. Cities burned, alliances dissolved, and the world watched as the once mighty coalition tore itself apart. In Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Fahd al-Rashid emerged as a surprising figure of stability. The young leader, scarred from assassination attempts and political betrayal, took a bold step that shocked the world. In a live broadcast, Fahd publicly converted to Judaism, citing his personal journey through the recent conflicts as a turning point. For too long, we have been divided by ancient grudges, Fahd declared. But I believe that peace begins with understanding, and understanding begins with faith. His words reverberated across the globe. While many in the Muslim world condemned his decision as betrayal, others saw it as an act of courage. Riots broke out in some cities, but in others, movements for interfaith dialogue and reconciliation began to gain momentum. In Israel, Prime Minister Elazar acknowledged Fahd's conversion as a historic moment. He is a bridge between worlds, Elazar said in a press conference, a living testament to the possibility of unity in our fractured region. Meanwhile, Amir Haddad reflected on the shifting tides. The battle against Prometheus had been won, but the scars left behind, both physical and spiritual, would take generations to heal. Yet, amidst the wreckage, there was hope. Nations were beginning to confront the role they had played in the chaos, taking the first steps toward a fragile reckoning. The seventh contraction. The final earthquake struck without warning, its tremors reverberating through the region with devastating force. In Jerusalem, ancient walls crumbled, their stones falling like echoes of the past. The Temple Mount, a symbol of millennia-old conflict and reverence, cracked open to reveal something extraordinary, a hidden chamber untouched by time. As rescue teams worked to stabilize the city, archaeologists and religious scholars flocked to the discovery. Inside the chamber, an inscription was found carved into the stone in Hebrew. "Prepare the way of the Lord." The message ignited a global firestorm. Religious leaders hailed it as divine confirmation of prophecy. Skeptics dismissed it as a historical coincidence, while archaeologists debated its origins. News outlets broadcast images of the chamber to millions, fueling speculation about its significance. For Amir Haddad, the discovery was both profound and unsettling. Standing before the inscription, he felt the weight of everything he had experienced: the scroll, the prophecies, the light over Jerusalem. Was it all connected? Or were these events shaped by human hands, manipulated to appear divine? Layla Hassim, who had joined him at the site, offered a quiet reflection. "Perhaps it doesn't matter," she said. "Whether it's God, destiny, or just us, what matters is what we do next." The inscription became a symbol of renewal for some and a rallying cry for others. Across the world, debates raged and tensions simmered. But in Jerusalem, amidst the dust and ruins, there was a strange sense of calm, as though the city itself had exhaled after enduring so much. The seventh contraction had come, but whether it marked an ending or a beginning remained to be seen. Epilogue: A New Dawn. Months after the earthquake, Israel began the slow process of rebuilding. The scars of war were evident in the shattered cities and grieving families, but so too was the resilience of its people. The peace accord with Saudi Arabia had held, strengthened by Prince Fahad's continued advocacy for unity. Amir Haddad stood on a hill overlooking Jerusalem, the golden light of dawn washing over the city. The world had changed irrevocably. Prometheus was gone, its manipulations exposed. The Gog alliance had dissolved, its ambitions thwarted, and the ancient prophecies that had loomed over them all had seemingly been fulfilled. Yet questions lingered. The inscription, the light over Jerusalem, the scroll, were they divine interventions or the result of human orchestration? Amir had no answers, only the knowledge that they had endured. Layla Hassim stood beside him, her journey from Gaza to this moment, one of courage and transformation. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. Amir smiled faintly. "No, it's never over. But maybe we've bought enough time for something better." The city below stirred to life as its people began another day. For all the pain and loss, there was still hope, a fragile, enduring hope that the dawn might bring something new. As the sun rose higher, Amir turned away from the view, ready to face whatever came next. Faith, he realized, wasn't about certainty. It was about moving forward, even when the path was unclear. And so, with the first light of a new day, the story continued.